She was just a 19-year-old cleaner, wiping down floors no one noticed, until the CEO humiliated her in front of a dozen executives. "Why don't you give the investor pitch in German?" he sneered, laughing as the room joined in. Elira lowered her eyes, said nothing, and quietly walked out. No one knew that she cried in the stairwell that day, not because she was weak, but because she'd been here before. Moved across borders. Raised 2 siblings. Spoke 5 languages fluently. But she had learned to survive by staying invisible. Until one day the CEO's translator didn't show up. And Elira did something that left the whole boardroom silent. The sky outside the towering glass windows was still a deep, dark blue, scattered with the last few stars of the night. But on the 40th floor, the executive floor of the Brandt Corporation, the lights burned bright. They reflected off the polished marble floors, creating a world of sharp angles and long, lonely shadows. In this silent world, Elira moved like a whisper. At 19, she felt more like a part of the shadows than a person. Her cleaning cart was her quiet companion, its rubber wheels making a soft, shushing sound as she pushed it down the empty hallways. The air smelled of old coffee and the faint, clean scent of her own cleaning spray. To her, this was the smell of stillness, the smell of a world holding its breath before the storm of the workday began. She ran her cloth over the long, imposing boardroom table. It was made of a dark, heavy wood that felt cool to the touch. She imagined the important hands that would soon rest on its surface, the million-dollar deals that would be made right where her cloth was wiping away a smudge. As she worked, she was more than a cleaner. She was an observer. The building wasn't truly empty. Early morning video conferences with offices in Tokyo or New York often echoed from the speakerphones. Elira would hear voices speaking in rapid English, then smooth French, then sharp, precise German. While she emptied the trash cans filled with crumpled notes and old reports, she listened. She didn't just hear the sounds. She understood the words, the negotiations, the strategies. She was learning an entire business from the scraps it left behind. To the few early bird executives who might pass her in the hall, she was a blur of motion. A polite nod, a soft good morning, and then she would lower her eyes and blend back into the background. They never saw the spark of intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she pieced together conversations and understood the company's challenges better than some of the junior managers. She was the building's ghost, seen but not truly seen. Her shift ended just as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She would take the bus, leaving the world of glass and steel for a different reality. Her home was a small, third-floor apartment in a neighborhood that the executives on the 40th floor likely didn't know existed. The building was old and the hallway smelled of cabbage and damp carpets. But inside her family's apartment, it smelled like home. It was crowded and a little worn, but it was filled with the warmth the fancy office could never have. Here, Elira was not invisible. She was the rock. She lived with her mother, who worked 2 jobs and always seemed tired, and her 2 younger siblings, a brother of 10 and a sister of 7. She was their bridge to this new country. When a letter from the landlord arrived, full of complicated legal words, her mother would hand it to her with a worried look. Elira would read it, her voice calm and steady, and explain that the rent was going up again. She would help her little brother with his math homework and read bedtime stories to her sister, translating the fairy tales into the language of their old home so they wouldn't forget. On a small, wobbly bookshelf in the corner of the room she shared with her sister, there was a single, worn-out book. It was a textbook on international diplomacy. It had been her father's. He had given it to her before he passed away, telling her, "The world is just a big room full of people who don't understand each other. Learn to be the one who can translate, Elira. Not just the words, but the hearts." This book held her biggest, most secret dream. A dream of one day working in a place where words mattered more than money, where she could build bridges instead of just cleaning floors. It was a dream so fragile she kept it locked away, safe in the quiet dignity of her own silence. One Tuesday morning, the air on the executive floor was thick with tension. A very important pre-meeting was underway for a deal with some German investors. Elira was running behind schedule. The morning bus had been late, and she was hurrying to finish her tasks before the boardroom filled up completely. She tried to make herself even smaller than usual, staying close to the walls, her movements quick and silent. Mr. Brandt, the CEO, was at the center of it all. He was a man who seemed to take up all the air in a room. At 55, he wore his success like a suit of armor, and his cold, dismissive eyes swept over his employees, making them stand up a little straighter, a little more nervously. He was talking loudly, pointing at charts, and the junior executives around him nodded eagerly at his every word, their faces a mixture of admiration and fear. Alira was near the conference table, reaching to wipe a small coffee ring left from an earlier call. As she leaned in, a young executive, eager to hand Mr. Brandt a report, rushed past her without looking. He bumped her arm, just slightly, but it was enough. Her elbow connected with the tall glass pitcher of ice water sitting on the edge of the table. Time seemed to slow down. The pitcher tilted, the water sloshed, and a wave of it spilled out onto the gleaming wood. A small puddle formed, dangerously close to Mr. Brandt's expensive leather briefcase. A collective gasp went through the room. Everything stopped. "I am so sorry, sir," Alira whispered, her face flooding with heat. She instantly grabbed a clean cloth from her cart and knelt to soak up the spill, her heart pounding against her ribs. Mr. Brandt looked down. He didn't look at the water. He looked at her, and his face twisted into a mask of pure irritation. This wasn't just an accident to him, it was an interruption of his performance. He saw a perfect opportunity to assert his dominance. He let out a short, ugly laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor, it was a sound of contempt. "Just what we needed," he announced to the entire room. "Pay attention to what you're doing." He looked around at his employees, a cruel smirk on his face. "What's next on the agenda? Are you going to give the investor pitch in German for us?" A few of the younger executives let out forced, nervous chuckles. They were like a pack, following their leader's cue, even though the joke felt sour and mean. Alira felt frozen, the cold, wet cloth in her hand. A dozen pairs of eyes were on her, and she felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. Mr. Brandt wasn't done. He was enjoying being the center of attention. He pointed a long, manicured finger toward the presentation screen. "Go on," he mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't be shy. Say something, impress us with your vast knowledge of the German language." The nervous laughter died away, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. The cruelty of the moment was now laid bare. Alira's eyes were locked on the floor, on the reflection of the bright overhead lights in the puddle of water. She felt so small, so utterly powerless. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, heavy blanket smothering her. I can't, sir," she finally managed to say, her voice so soft it was barely audible. "Figures," Mr. Brandt muttered, the final, dismissive blow. He turned his back on her, dismissing her as if she were a piece of trash he had just kicked out of his way. He picked up his briefcase and moved it to the other side of the table. The show was over. Alira, her heart throbbing with a dull, painful ache, quickly finished cleaning the water, gathered her things, and fled the room. The only sound that followed her was the awkward shuffling of papers as the meeting tried to pretend that nothing had happened. You can just feel the sting of that moment, can't you? It makes you wonder how you'd handle it. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if a boss has ever made you feel small like that. Alira didn't stop walking until she reached the cold, sterile quiet of the staff bathroom at the end of the hall. She locked the door behind her and leaned her forehead against the cool metal. The fluorescent lights above hummed, a lonely, buzzing sound that seemed to echo the turmoil inside her. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the tears came anyway. They weren't loud, sobbing tears, but quiet, hot tears of humiliation that slid down her cheeks. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he had used her, a powerless girl, to make himself feel big in front of his employees. It was the feeling of being turned into a joke, of her quiet presence being twisted into a flaw. She cried for a minute, letting the shame wash over her. Then she took a shaky breath. "Don't," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror. "Don't you dare let him break you." She splashed cold water on her face, watching the tear tracks disappear. She would not give him that victory. Her phone buzzed in her uniform pocket. A text message from her mother. It was in their native language, simple and pure. "Thinking of you, my strong girl. Proud of you always." Reading those 4 words was like an anchor in a storm. Her mother didn't know what had happened, but she knew her daughter. That was what mattered. Mr. Brandt saw a clumsy cleaner. Her mother saw a strong girl. Alira knew which one was the truth. That evening, the city felt different. The usual hustle and bustle of the streets seemed distant. She took a detour on her walk to the bus station, a path that led her past the grand, imposing buildings of the city university. It was a place that represented a world she couldn't touch, a life she couldn't afford. Students her own age were spilling out of a lecture hall, laughing and talking. A small crowd was gathered in the main square. A young man, a student leader, was standing on a makeshift stage, giving a fiery, passionate speech about creating opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background. He was speaking in German, his words flying out into the cool night air with power and conviction. Elira stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of a large oak tree. She listened intently. As the student's voice rose with passion, Elira's own lips began to move. She whispered his words back to the night, her German accent flawless, the cadence and emotion a perfect mirror of his. Then, still whispering, she began to translate, her mind working effortlessly. She spoke the speech again to herself in perfect French, and then once more in crisp, articulate English. A memory surfaced, warm and clear. She was a little girl, no older than her sister was now, sitting on the floor of their old apartment with her father. He wasn't a scholar, he was a construction worker with calloused hands and a gentle heart. But he had a love for the world. He would bring home old books and worn-out language tapes he found at second-hand shops. He would point to the words, sounding them out with her. "Words build bridges, Elira," he would say, his voice soft and serious. "Most of the world's problems come from people not understanding each other. If you can speak to them in their own language, you can build a bridge right into their heart." He had given her 5 languages, not as a party trick, but as a set of keys to unlock the world. Standing there in the shadow of the university she couldn't enter, Elira felt the quiet fire her father had lit inside her begin to burn hotter. It was a hidden strength, a secret power. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she would not keep it hidden forever. 2 days passed. The memory of the humiliation had settled into a hard knot in Elira's stomach, but she did her work with the same quiet diligence as always. The office, however, was in a state of high alert. The day of the big meeting with the German investors had finally arrived. The company's future in the European market depended on this presentation. Mr. Brandt had been practicing his part of the speech all morning, his voice booming from his corner office. Elira was in the main hallway, wiping down the large glass walls that separated the offices. She worked methodically, her mind elsewhere, when a sudden cry of panic shattered the professional calm. It was Clara, Mr. Brandt's executive assistant, and she sounded hysterical. "What do you mean he has the flu?" Clara almost shrieked into her phone. "A fever of 103? No, that's impossible. The meeting is in less than 2 hours. You have to come." Elira froze mid-wipe, her hand hovering over the glass. She could hear the frantic edge in Clara's voice as it grew louder. "What's going on?" an executive demanded, rushing out of his office. "The translator," Clara said, her hand over the phone's receiver. "He's cancelled. He's in the hospital." A wave of panic rippled through the office. "Well, get another one," another manager snapped. "Call an agency." "I am," Clara cried, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I've called 3. They're all saying it's too short notice. They have no one available for high-level financial translation." The atmosphere turned from tense to chaotic. People were running back and forth. "Call the embassy," someone shouted. "Call the university's language department. Somebody in the city must speak German." But every suggestion was a dead end. The investors were already in a car on their way from the airport. The entire multi-million-dollar deal was about to collapse because of a language barrier. Elira stood motionless in the hallway. She heard her father's voice in her memory, *, words build bridges. *, then she heard Mr. Brandt's mocking voice in her head. *, go on, impress us. *, the 2 voices clashed inside her. Fear coiled in her stomach. Fear of being ridiculed again, of being fired for overstepping her bounds, of failing. She could just stay here in the safety of the shadows and watch them fall apart. No one would blame her. But then she thought of her mother's tired face. She thought of the diplomacy book on her shelf. She thought of the quiet fire inside her. This wasn't just their problem. This was her moment. A choice. To remain silent or to speak. She looked down at her hands. The hand holding the cleaning cloth was trembling slightly. She took a deep, steadying breath and slowly, deliberately, clenched it into a tight fist. The trembling stopped. The decision was made. She placed her cloth back on her cart, turned, and began to walk. Each step out of the hallway and into the center of the frantic office felt heavy, deliberate. She walked past the panicked executives, straight to Clara's desk. Clara looked up, her face pale and streaked with stress. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cracking. Elira looked her directly in the eye. Her own voice was soft, but it cut through the noise of the office like a bell. I can help, she said. She's about to change everything. If you believe in people who find their voice and stand up for themselves, take a second to subscribe to our channel for more stories just like this one. Clara stared at Alira as if she hadn't heard her correctly. Her mind was racing so fast she could barely process the words. Help? Help with what? She asked, her voice frayed with anxiety. The translation, Alira repeated, her gaze unwavering. For the meeting with the German investors. I speak German. I can do it. For a moment, Clara just blinked. The cleaner? It seemed like a crazy, desperate dream. But then she looked into Alira's eyes and saw not a hint of doubt. She saw a strange, solid calmness. With every other option gone, desperation won. Are you sure? Clara whispered. This is very complex financial language. I am sure, Alira said. Without another word, Clara grabbed Alira's arm and practically dragged her towards the CEO's office. She burst through the door without knocking. Mr. Brandt, sir. Mr. Brandt was pacing his office like a caged tiger, his face red with fury and stress. He whirled around, ready to yell at the interruption. When he saw Alira standing there in her simple cleaner's uniform, his fury curdled into disbelief and then into outright scorn. What is this? He boomed. Clara, I told you to bring me a solution, not a joke. Sir, Clara said, completely out of breath. She says she can do the translation. Mr. Brandt let out a short, bark-like laugh. It was the same cruel, dismissive sound from the other day, but this time it was laced with desperation. You, he sneered, pointing a trembling finger at Alira. The girl who spills water? You think you can handle a multi-million-dollar negotiation? I don't need a janitor speaking for my company. Get her out of my sight. Now. But Alira didn't cower. She didn't look away. The fear she had felt before was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She had already been humiliated. What more could he do? She stood her ground and met his furious gaze. I will not speak for you, sir, she said, her voice perfectly level, carrying an authority that startled him. I will only translate your words. That is all. If you like. Her quiet confidence seemed to enrage him even more. He wanted her to tremble, to apologize, to run away. That she didn't was an affront to his power. He decided he would break her right here and now. He would expose her as a fraud and put her back in her place. Oh, you're a real professional now, are you? He said, his voice dripping with venom. He snatched a thick, bound document off his desk. It was the advance copy of the investor's own financial portfolio, a dense report filled with pages of technical jargon and complex charts, all in advanced business German. All right then, Miss Translator. Let's see what you've got. He thrust the heavy document into her hands. He leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms in a gesture of finality, a smug, predatory look on his face. He was ready to watch her crash and burn. The other executives in the room held their breath, watching the train wreck unfold. Alira took the document. Her hands were steady. She didn't stumble. She simply lowered her gaze to the first page. And then she began to read. The first words that came out of her mouth were in German. They were fluent, crisp, and perfectly pronounced. A ripple of shock went through the room. Clara's jaw dropped. The executives exchanged stunned glances. Alira didn't just read the words. She spoke them with the natural rhythm of a native speaker. She read a full paragraph, then paused. She lifted her head, looked directly at Mr. Brandt, and began to translate into English. This opening statement summarizes their asset allocation over the last fiscal year, she began, her voice clear and strong. They've shifted significantly from traditional equities into renewable energy sectors. She turned a page. And here, she said, pointing to a complex chart, this footnote is interesting. The original German phrasing suggests a cultural nuance. It implies not just a financial strategy, but a philosophical commitment to sustainability. This isn't just about profit for them, it's about legacy. She was not just translating. She was analyzing. She was interpreting. She was revealing a depth of understanding that went far beyond what any translation agency could have provided. The smug, cruel smirk on Mr. Brandt's face completely vanished. It was as if his strings had been cut. His face went from red to pale, his mouth hanging slightly ajar. He was staring at the quiet girl in the cleaner's uniform, and for the first time, he was seeing her. And he was speechless. At that exact moment, the frosted glass doors of the conference room swished open. Clara's assistant poked her head in. "They're here." The German investors entered. There were 3 men and 1 woman, all exuding an air of quiet confidence and serious professionalism. They were the kind of people who could smell weakness from a mile away. Mr. Brandt, still reeling, scrambled to compose himself. He smoothed his tie, forced a stiff, unnatural smile onto his face, and strode forward to greet them. "Willkommen," he said, his voice a little too loud, his German accent thick and clumsy. He tried a few more pleasantries, something about the flight and the weather, but the words came out jumbled and awkward. He sounded like a tourist with a phrasebook. The investors smiled politely, but their eyes held a flicker of confusion and disappointment. They exchanged nearly invisible glances with each other. The meeting was already starting on the wrong foot. Alira, who had been standing silently by the wall, saw the train veering off the tracks. She took a single, small step forward. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but clear for Mr. Brandt's ears only. "He is saying he is deeply honored to welcome you to the company headquarters." Mr. Brandt shot her a complicated look, a mixture of fury at being interrupted and a desperate plea for help. He was about to hiss at her to be quiet when the lead investor, an older gentleman with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked past the fumbling CEO. His gaze landed directly on Alira. He addressed her, not Mr. Brandt. He spoke in calm, formal German. "You have a very clear accent," he said. Then, with a simple, decisive gesture of his hand, he added, "Please, let her speak." It wasn't a request. It was a transfer of authority. In that one moment, the power in the room shifted entirely. All eyes, the investors, the executives, Mr. Brandt's, swung to Alira. She was no longer in the shadows. She was standing in the brightest spotlight of her life. For a heartbeat, she felt the immense pressure. Then a profound calm settled over her. She thought of her father. "Build a bridge." She stood up straight, took a quiet breath, and met the lead investor's gaze. And she began to speak. She didn't speak for long, no more than 2 or 3 minutes. But in that time, she wove a spell with her words. Her German was not just fluent, it was elegant. It was the language of poets and philosophers, applied with the precision of a surgeon to the world of business. She didn't use Mr. Brandt's clumsy, corporate jargon. Instead, she spoke from the heart. She spoke of the company's founding principles of a commitment to quality and innovation. She spoke about building trust, not just contracts. She talked about a shared future, a respectful partnership between their 2 cultures. Her voice was calm, confident, and utterly mesmerizing. When she finished, a profound silence fell over the room. It was a silence filled with awe. Mr. Brandt stood by the window, utterly forgotten, looking like a ghost at his own funeral. Then the lead investor began to clap. It wasn't polite applause. It was a slow, deliberate, rhythmic clap of genuine respect. One by one, the other investors joined in, then the stunned executives, until the entire room was filled with thunderous applause. It was all for her. The investor with the kind eyes approached her, his own eyes shining with admiration. "That was truly remarkable," he said in German. "Your grasp of the language is exceptional. Tell me, which university did you attend for your studies?" A small, humble smile touched Alira's lips. "I didn't attend a university, sir," she replied softly, her voice now back to its quiet gentleness. "I just listened." The rest of the meeting was a resounding success. With Alira as the seamless bridge between the 2 parties, every point was made with clarity and nuance. The investors were not just impressed, they were charmed. They saw a company that, through Alira, demonstrated grace, intelligence, and a deep respect for their culture. The deal wasn't just saved, it was strengthened. After the investors had departed, smiling and shaking Alira's hand with genuine warmth, a strange and awkward quiet descended upon the 40th floor. The executives who had snickered at Mr. Brandt's cruel joke now avoided his gaze, shuffling papers on their desks. They looked at Alira with a new, dizzying mix of respect and shame. She was no longer just the cleaner. She was the hero of the day. Mr. Brandt finally emerged from his office. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable, forced geniality. He walked over to Alira, who was standing quietly by the window. "Alira," he said, using her name with a strange formality. That was just incredible. A truly stunning performance." He was trying to sound like a proud mentor who had discovered a hidden gem. "Why on earth didn't you say anything sooner? A talent like yours, we could have been using your skills for months." Elira turned from the window to face him. Her expression was not angry or triumphant. It was simply clear, like still water. She looked directly into his eyes, and the entire office seemed to lean in to hear her response. "You never asked," she said. Her voice was soft, but the two words landed with the force of a gavel. They were simple, direct, and undeniably true. They laid bare the truth of how he and everyone else had seen her, as a function, not a person. There was nothing he could say. The words stripped away all his excuses. He had never asked because he had never looked. He just gave a weak, defeated nod and retreated back into his office, closing the door behind him. Less than an hour later, a formal email requested Elira's presence in the Human Resources Department. When she entered, the head of HR stood up to greet her, pulling out a chair for her. There was no cleaning cart, no mention of her old duties. On the table was a thick folder with her name on it. "Elira," the woman began, "on behalf of the entire company, we would like to offer our deepest apologies for the circumstances that led to today's revelation." The offer was laid out clearly. A new, full-time position as a junior communications and international relations associate. It came with a salary that made Elira's head spin, more than her mother made in a year. And the woman added, the company would be honored to provide a full scholarship for her to attend the city university to get the degree in diplomacy she deserved. As she walked home that evening, the city lights seemed to glitter just for her. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. She walked past the university, but for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She saw it as her future. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, but this time from joy. She called her mother. "Mama," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Elira? Is everything okay?" Her mother's worried voice came through the line. Tears of relief welled in Elira's eyes. "Everything is more than okay, Mama," she said, a laugh bubbling up through the tears. "You don't have to worry anymore. You don't have to work 2 jobs. I can take care of us now." The quiet victory was finally real. 6 months later, the Elira who walked the halls of the 40th floor was a different woman. She wore a smart, tailored blazer and carried a tablet instead of a cleaning cart. Her hair was still tied back, but now it was in a professional, elegant style. She moved with a newfound confidence, but she had not lost the quiet grace that was at her core. She hadn't become another Mr. Brandt. In fact, her presence had begun to subtly change the culture of the floor, making it a little kinder, a little more aware. This afternoon, she was giving a tour to a group of new interns from the company's German office. She was speaking to them in their own language, her voice warm and engaging as she explained the company's global vision. She wasn't just talking about profits and markets. She was talking about people, about the importance of listening, and about how every single role in the company contributed to the whole. As she led the interns past the boardroom, she noticed the evening cleaning crew had begun their work. A young woman, not much older than Elira had been, was quietly wiping down the long conference table. She kept her head down, her movements efficient and invisible, her face set in a look of concentration, trying not to be in anyone's way. A pang of recognition went through Elira. She saw herself in that young woman, the quietness, the diligence, the invisibility. Elira paused the tour. She smiled at the interns and then walked over to the new cleaner. The young woman looked up, startled, expecting to be told she was in the way. Elira smiled a gentle, genuine smile. "My name is Elira," she said in the local language, her voice soft. "I started in this exact job, right here at this table." The cleaner's eyes widened in surprise. "This is a good company," Elira continued, "but sometimes opportunity doesn't knock. You have to open the door yourself. Never be afraid to let people know what you're capable of. And if you ever want to sit in on one of the open meetings to listen and learn, you just let me know. Everyone is welcome." A flicker of hope, of a dream perhaps, lit up the young woman's eyes. She stood up a little straighter. "Thank you," she whispered, a real smile touching her lips for the first time. Elira nodded and rejoined her group. Later that day, she stood alone at the massive window on the 40th floor, looking out at the sprawling city below. She was no longer the girl who cleaned the glass from the inside, looking out at a world she couldn't reach. She was now a part of that world, looking out at a future she was actively building. She thought of her father and the bridges he taught her to build. Her victory wasn't just for herself. It was for all the other silent voices waiting for their chance to be heard. And she would spend her life making sure she held the door open for them. Elira's story shows us that a person's worth isn't about their job title, but what's in their heart and mind. If you love stories about the underdog finally getting their moment, we've put together a special playlist of our best ones. You can find the link for it in the comments below. Thank you for watching.